Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. We are live on both Facebook and YouTube. I'm sure you all can hear me just fine, yes. Well, no, I don't really need to light the candle. I've got a new humidifier. It's very delightful, and it's got some nice relaxing essential oils in it already. If you are on YouTube, wonderful. Yes, welcome to Storytime, another enticing episode of Storytime. But tonight we will be resuming Holes, Part 3. Well, I'm just calling it Part 3. Really, we're resuming from page 21, 22, around there. And we'll read about 10 pages of that tonight before we pick back up on Thursday. In the meantime, waiting for some more people to jump in. If you're currently watching, thank you for being here. If you haven't already subscribed, don't forget to do so. Yes, if you're watching on Facebook, make sure you jump over to YouTube as well, where you can like and subscribe the video there. I'm really hoping to build up my subscribership so I can get more people to jump in for story time and enjoy this. But in the meantime, I'm very happy to have you here, those of you who are watching. So if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, wherever you're watching, like and subscribe on YouTube. Join the Storytime Facebook group where I give my updates. I do give updates on my personal Facebook page. I'll start giving them in the Storytime group. That seems more appropriate. Regardless, those are where the updates come, usually doing story time at 10 p.m. Tonight, though, late. It is 11:45, so it is a special midnight episode where we resume Holes. Anyway, glad to have all of you here, and I look forward to doing a lot more reading with you. In the meantime, we shall get started. Now, if you are here, make sure you comment, okay? Definitely push the like button, push the subscribe button, and leave a comment. I want to hear from you. If you have requests, I want to hear about those requests. If you have comments, I want to know. If you just want to shout out, leave a comment, and that way I'll know you're watching, and I can give you a shout out during the story, during the reading, and also at the very, very end. Because I want to thank you for being here. I do. I sincerely do. I love and appreciate all of you. So, Heather, thank you very much for leaving a comment. I'm glad you're here. Glad to see you. That way I can give you a shout out. So thank you for following directions in such a swell manner. You do so excellently. Anyway, I will stop wasting your time. This is almost 3 minutes of me jabbering, talking about liking and subscribing my videos. So enough of that. We'll get on to the reading. Time for the actual story. And, oh, by the way, don't forget to share. Share so that, we can spread the love. In fact, I will share it as well. I'm going to share it on my Facebook so that people can watch there. Oops, no, I don't want to pay. Facebook, yes, Facebook, that's what I want. And I shall update my status. There we go. Watch story time happening now. There we are. And now people will be able to see that I'm doing this and they will join in and it will be wonderful. All right. I don't know how many people are going to watch near midnight, but we shall see, dear listeners/viewers, shan't we? All right. And now, without further ado, the story. Holes, Part 3. Let us slip back a few lines as a slight reminder. I don't want her to worry about me, he explained. Zero said nothing. He just stared at the letter with a serious, almost angry look on his face. Stanley slipped it back into the stationery box. Did the shoes have red X's on the back? Zero asked him. It took Stanley a moment, but then he realized Zero was asking about Clyde Livingston's shoes. Yes, they did, he said. He wondered how Zero knew that. Brand X was a popular brand of sneakers. Maybe Clyde Livingston made a commercial for them. Zero stared at him for a moment with the same intensity with which he had been staring at the letter. Stanley poked his finger through a hole in the vinyl couch and pulled out some of the stuffing. He wasn't aware of what he was doing. Come on, caveman, dinner, said Armpit. You coming, caveman, said Squid. Stanley looked around to see that Armpit and Squid were talking to him. Sure, he said. He put the piece of stationery back in the box, then got up and followed the boys out to the tables. The lump wasn't the caveman. He was. He shrugged. He shrugged his left shoulder. It was better than bath bag. Stanley had no trouble falling asleep, but morning came much too quickly. Every muscle and joint in his body ached as he had to get out of bed. He didn't think it was possible, but his body hurt more than it had the day before. It wasn't just his arms and his back, but his legs, ankles, and waist also hurt. The only thing that got him out of bed was knowing that every second he wasted meant he was 1 second closer to the rising of the sun. He hated the sun. He could hardly lift his spoon during breakfast, and then he was out on the lake. His spoon replaced by a shovel. He found a crack in the ground and began his second hole. He stepped on the shovel blade and pushed on the very back of the shaft with the base of his thumb. This hurt less than trying to hold the shaft with his blistered fingers. As he dug, he was careful to dump the dirt far away from the hole. He needed to save the area around the hole for when his hole was much deeper. He didn't know if he'd ever get that far. X-Ray was right. The second hole was the hardest. It would take a miracle. As long as the sun wasn't out yet, he removed his cap and used it to help protect his hands. When the sun rose, he would have to put it back on his head. His neck and forehead had been badly burned the day before. He took it one shovel for a time and tried not to think of the awesome task that lay ahead of him. After an hour or so, his sore muscles seemed to loosen up a bit. He grunted as he tried to stick his shovel into the dirt. His cap slipped out from under his fingers and the shovel fell free. He let it lie there. He took a drink from his canteen. He guessed that the water truck should be coming soon, but he didn't finish all the water just in case he was wrong. He'd learned to wait until he saw the truck before drinking the last drop. The sun wasn't yet up, but its rays arced over the horizon and brought light to the sky. He reached down to pick up his cap, and there next to it he saw a wide, flat rock. As he put his cap on his head, he continued to look down at the rock. He picked it up. He thought he could see the shape of a fish fossilized in it. He rubbed off some dirt, and the outline of the fish became clearer. The sun peeked over the horizon, and he could actually see tiny lines where every one of the fish's bones had been. He looked at the barren land all around him. True, everyone referred to this area as the lake, but it was still hard to believe that this dry wasteland was once full of water. Then he remembered what Mr. Sir and Mr. Pendanski had both said. If he dug up anything interesting, he should report it to one of them. If the warden liked it, he would get the rest of the day off. He looked back down at the fish. He'd found his miracle. He continued to dig, though very slowly, as he waited for the water truck. He didn't want to bring attention to his find, afraid that one of the other boys might try to take it from him. He tossed the rock face down beside his dirt pile, as if it had no special value. A short while later, he saw the cloud of dirt heading across the lake. The truck stopped and the boys lined up. They always lined up in the same order, Stanley realized, no matter who got there first. X-Ray was always at the front of the line. Then came Armpit, Squid, Zigzag, Magnet, and Zero. Stanley got in line behind Zero. He was glad to be at the back, so no one would notice the fossil. His pants had very large pockets, but the rock still made a bulge. Mr. Pendanski filled each boy's canteen until Stanley was the only one left. "I found something," Stanley said, taking it out of his pocket. Mr. Pendanski reached for Stanley's canteen, but Stanley handed him the rock instead. "What's this?" "It's a fossil," said Stanley. "See the fish?" Mr. Pendanski looked at it again. "See, you can never see all of its little bones," said Stanley. "Interesting," said Mr. Pendanski. "Let me have your canteen." Stanley handed it to him. Mr. Pendanski filled it, then returned it. "So do I get the rest of the day off?" "What for?" "You know, you said if I found something interesting, the warden would day off." Mr. Pendanski laughed as he gave the fossil back to Stanley. "Sorry, Stanley, the warden isn't interested in fossils." "Let me see that," said Magnet, taking the rock from Stanley. Stanley continued to stare at Mr. Pendanski. "Hey, Zig, dig this rock." "Cool," said Zigzag. Stanley saw his fossil being passed around. "I don't see nothing," said X-Ray. He took off his glasses, wiped them on his dirty clothes, and put them back on. "See, look at the little fishes," said Armpit. Stanley returned to his hole. It wasn't fair. Mr. Pendanski had even said his fossil was interesting. He slammed his shovel into the ground and pried up another piece of dirt. After a while, he noticed X-Ray had come by and was watching him dig. "Hey, caveman, let me talk to you for a second," X-Ray said. Stanley put down his shovel and stepped up out of his hole. "Say, listen," said X-Ray. "If you find something else, give it to me, okay?" Stanley wasn't sure what to say. X-Ray was clearly the leader of the group, and Stanley didn't want to get on his bad side. "You're new here, right?" said X-Ray. "I've been here almost a year. I've never found anything. You know, my eyesight's not so good. No one knows this, but you know why my name's X-Ray?" Stanley shrugged one shoulder. "It's Pig Latin for Rex. That's all. I'm too blind for anything else to find anything." Stanley tried to remember how Pig Latin worked. "I mean," X-Ray went on, "why should you get a day off when you've only been here a couple of days? If anybody gets a day off, it should be me. That's only fair, right?" "I guess," said Stanley. He agreed. X-Ray smiled. "You're a good guy, caveman." Stanley picked up his shovel. The more he thought about it, the more he was glad that he agreed to let X-Ray have anything he might find. If he was going to survive at Camp Green Lake, it was far more important that X-Ray think he was a good guy than it was for him to get one day off. Besides, he didn't expect to find anything anyway. There probably wasn't anything of interest out there, and even if there was, he'd never been what you could call lucky. He slammed his blade into the ground, then dumped out another shovel full of dirt. It was a little surprising, he thought, that X-Ray was the leader of the group, since he obviously wasn't the biggest or the toughest. In fact, except for Zero, X-Ray was the smallest. Armpit was the biggest. Zigzag may have been taller than Armpit, but that was only because of his neck, yet Armpit and all the others seemed to be willing to do whatever X-Ray asked of them. As Stanley dug up another shovel full of dirt, it occurred to him that Armpit wasn't the biggest. He, the caveman, was bigger. He was glad they called him Caveman. It meant they accepted him as a member of the group. He would have been glad even if they'd called him Bathbag. It was really quite remarkable to him. At school, bullies like Derek Dunn used to pick on him, yet Derek Dunn would be scared senseless by any of the boys here. As he dug his hole, Stanley thought about what it would be like if Derek Dunn had to fight Armpit or Squid. Derek wouldn't stand a chance. He imagined what it would be like if he became good friends with all of them, and then for some reason they all went with him to his school, and then Derek Dunn tried to steal his notebook. "Just what do you think you're doing?" asks Squid, as he slams his hands into Derek Dunn's smug face. "Caveman's our friend," says Armpit, grabbing him by the shin collar. Stanley played the scene over and over again in his mind, each time watching another boy from Group D beat up Derek Dunn. It helped him dig his hole and ease his own suffering. Whatever pain he felt was being felt 10 times worse by Derek Dunn. Again, Stanley was the last one to finish digging. It was late afternoon when he dragged himself back to the compound. This time he would have accepted a ride on the truck if it was offered. When he got to the tent, he found Mr. Pendanski and the other boys sitting in the circle on the ground. "Welcome, Stanley," said Mr. Pendanski. "Hey, caveman, you got your hole dug?" asked Magnet. He managed to nod. "You spitting it?" asked Squid. He nodded again. "You're right," he said to X-Ray. "The second hole's the hardest." X-Ray shook his head. "Nope, the third hole's the hardest," he said. "Come join our circle," said Mr. Pendanski. Stanley plopped down between Squid and Magnet. He needed to rest up before taking a shower. "We've been discussing what we want to do with our lives," said Mr. Pendanski. "We're not going to be at Camp Green Lake forever. We need to prepare for the day we leave here and join the rest of society." "Hey, that's great, Mom," said Magnet. "They're going to finally let you out of here?" The other boys laughed. "Okay, Jose," said Mr. Pendanski. "What do you want to do with your life?" "I don't know," said Magnet. "You need to think about that," said Mr. Pendanski. "It's important to have goals. Otherwise, you're going to end up right back in jail." "What do you like to do?" "I don't know," said Magnet. "You must like something," said Mr. Pendanski. "I like animals," said Magnet. "Good," said Mr. Pendanski. "Does anyone know of any jobs that involve animals?" "Veterinarian," said Armpit. "That's right," said Mr. Pendanski. "He could work in a zoo," said Zigzag. "He belongs in the zoo," said Squid. Then he and X-Ray laughed. "How about you, Stanley? Any ideas for Jose?" Stanley sighed. "Animal trainer," he said, "like for the circus or movies or something like that." "Any one of those jobs sound good to you, Jose?" asked Mr. Pendanski. "Yeah, I like what Caveman said about training animals for movies. I think it would be fun to train monkeys." X-Ray laughed. "Don't laugh, Rex," said Mr. Pendanski. "We don't laugh at people's dreams. Someone is going to have to train monkeys for the movies." "Who are you kidding, Mom?" asked X-Ray. "Magnet's never going to be a monkey trainer." "You don't know that," said Mr. Pendanski. "I'm not saying it's going to be easy. Nothing in life is easy, but that's no reason to give up. You'll be surprised what you can accomplish if you set your mind to it. After all, you only have one life, so you should try to make the most of it." Stanley tried to figure out what he'd say if Mr. Pendanski asked him what he wanted to do with his life. He used to think he wanted to work for the FBI, but this didn't seem the appropriate place to mention that. "So far, you've all done a pretty good job at messing up your lives," said Mr. Pendanski. "I know you think you're cool." He looked at Stanley. "So you're caveman now, huh? You like digging holes, caveman?" Stanley didn't know what to say. "Well, let me tell you something, caveman. You are here on account of one person. If it wasn't for that person, you wouldn't be here digging holes in the hot sun. You know who that person is?" "My no-good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather." The other boys howled with laughter. Even Zero smiled. It was the first time Stanley had ever seen Zero smile. He usually had such an angry expression on his face. Now he had such a huge smile it almost seemed too big for his face, like the smile of a jack-o'-lantern. "No," said Mr. Pendanski. "That person is you, Stanley. You're the reason you're here. You're responsible for yourself. You messed up your life, and it's up to you to fix it. No one else is going to do it for you, for any of you." Mr. Pendanski looked from one boy to another. "You're all special in your own way," he said. "You've all got something to offer. You have to think about what you want to do, then do it. Even you, Zero. You're not completely worthless." The smile was now gone from Zero's face. "What do you want to do with your life?" Mr. Pendanski asked him. Zero's mouth was shut tight. He glared. As he glared at Mr. Pendanski, his dark eyes seemed to expand. "What about it, Zero?" asked Mr. Pendanski. "What do you like to do?" "I like to dig holes." All too soon. Hang on, before we do that, let me see if there are any comments or anything. "Hello, Mum. Hello, Jean. Glad to see both of you here." Oh, right. It is a late one, so I'm not surprised we don't have too many viewers right now. I see. Yes. All right. Great. Okay. Just a few, but that's okay. Let us continue forward. All too soon, Stanley was back out on the lake, sticking his shovel into the dirt. X-Ray was right. The third hole was the hardest. So was the fourth hole, and the fifth hole, and the sixth, and the... Oh. He dug his shovel into the dirt. After a while, he'd lost track of the day of the week and how many holes he'd dug. It all seemed like one big hole, and it would take a year and a half to dig it. He guessed he'd lost at least 5 pounds. He figured that in a year and a half, he'd be either in great physical condition or else dead. He dug his shovel into the dirt. It couldn't always be this hot, he thought. Surely it got cooler in December. Maybe then they froze. He dug his shovel into the dirt. His skin had gotten tougher. It didn't hurt so much to hold the shovel. As he drank from his canteen, he looked up at the sky. A cloud had appeared earlier in the day. It was the first cloud he could remember seeing since coming to Camp Green Lake. He and the other boys had been watching all day, hoping it would move in front of the sun. Occasionally it got close, but it was just teasing them. His hole was waist deep. He dug his shovel into the dirt. As he dumped it out, he thought he saw something glisten as it fell into the dirt pile. Whatever it was quickly buried. Stanley stared at the pile a moment, unsure if he'd even seen it. Even if it was something, what good would it do him? He'd promised to give anything he found to X-Ray. It didn't seem worth the effort to climb out of his hole and to check it. He glanced up at the cloud, which was close enough to the sun that he had to squint to look at it. He dug his shovel back into the earth, scooped out some dirt, and lifted it over his dirt pile. But instead of dumping it there, he tossed it off to the side. His curiosity had gotten the better of him. He climbed up out of his hole and sifted his fingers through the pile. He felt something hard and metallic. He pulled it out. It was a gold tube about as long and as wide as the second finger on his right hand. The tube was open at one end and closed at the other. He used a few drops of his precious water to clean it. There seemed to be some kind of design on the flat, closed end. He poured a few more drops of water on it and rubbed it on the inside of his pants pocket. He looked again at the design engraved into the flat bottom on the tube. He could see an outline of a heart with the letters KB etched inside it. He tried to figure out some way that he wouldn't have to give it to X-Ray. He could just keep it, but that wouldn't do him any good. He wanted a day off. He looked at the large piles of dirt near where X-Ray was digging. X-Ray was probably almost finished for the day. Getting the rest of the day off would hardly do him much good. X-Ray would first have to show the tube to Mr. Sir or Mr. Pendanski, who would then have to show it to the warden. By then, X-Ray might be done anyway. Stanley wondered about trying to secretly take the tube directly to the warden. He could explain the situation to the warden, and the warden might make up an excuse for giving him the day off so X-Ray wouldn't suspect. He looked across the lake toward the cabin under the 2 oak trees. The place scared him. He had been at Camp Green Lake almost 2 weeks, and still he hadn't seen the warden. That was just as well. If he could go his entire year and a half without seeing the warden, that would be fine with him. Besides, he didn't know if the warden would find the tube interesting. Adjusting my feet here. Sorry. Find it interesting. Besides, he didn't know if the warden would find the tube interesting. He looked at it again. It looked familiar. He thought he'd seen something like it before, somewhere before, but he couldn't quite place it. "What you got there, caveman?" said Zigzag. Stanley's large hand closed around the tube. "Nothing, just a—" It was useless. "I think I might have found something." "Another fossil?" "No, I'm not sure what it is." "Let me see," said Zigzag. Instead of showing it to Zigzag, Stanley brought it to X-Ray. Zigzag followed. X-Ray looked at the tube, then rubbed his dirty glasses on his dirty shirt and looked at the tube again. One by one, the other boys dropped their shovels and came to look. "It looks like an old shotgun shell," said Squid. "Yeah, that's probably what it is," said Stanley. He decided not to mention the engraved design. Maybe nobody would notice it. He doubted X-Ray could see it. "No, it's too long and thin to be a shotgun shell," said Magnet. "It's probably just a piece of junk," said Stanley. "Well, I'll show it to Mom," said X-Ray. "See what he thinks. Who knows? Maybe I'll get the day off." "Your hole's almost finished," said Stanley. "Yeah, so?" Stanley raised and lowered his shoulders. "So why don't you wait until tomorrow to show it to Mom?" he suggested. "You can pretend you found it first thing in the morning. Then you can get the whole day off instead of just an hour or so on this afternoon." X-Ray smiled. "Good thinking, caveman." He dropped the tube into his large pocket into his large pocket on the right leg of his dirty orange pants. Stanley returned to his hole. When the water truck came, Stanley started to make his place at the end of the line, but X-Ray told him to get behind Magnet in front of Zero. Stanley moved up one place in line. Oh, Zero. That night, as Stanley lay on his scratchy and smelly cot, he tried to figure out what he could have done differently, but there was nothing he could do. For once in his unlucky life, he was in the right place at the right time, and it still didn't help him. "You got it?" he asked X-Ray the next morning at breakfast. X-Ray looked at him with half-opened eyes behind his dirty glasses. "I don't know what you're talking about," he grumbled. "You know," said Stanley. "No, I don't," X-Ray snapped. "So just leave me alone, okay? I don't want to talk to you." Stanley didn't say another word. Mr. Sir marched the boys out to the lake, chewing sunflower seeds along the way and spitting out the shells. He scraped the ground with his boot heel to mark where each boy was supposed to dig. Stanley stamped down on the back of the blade of the shovel, piercing the hard, dry earth. He couldn't figure out why X-Ray snapped at him. If he wasn't going to produce the tube, why did he make Stanley give it to him? Was he just going to keep it? The tube was gold in color, but Stanley didn't think it was real gold. The water truck came a little after sunrise. Stanley finished his last drop of water and stepped up out of his hole. At this time of day, Stanley sometimes could see some distant hills or mountains on the other side of the lake. They were only visible for a short while and would soon disappear behind a haze of heat and dirt. The truck stopped, and the dust cloud drifted past it. X-Ray took his place at the front of the line. Mr. Pendanski filled his canteen. "Thanks, Mum," X-Ray said. He didn't mention the tube. Mr. Pendanski filled all the canteens, then climbed back into the cab of the pickup. He still had to bring water to Group E. Stanley could see him digging about 200 yards away. "Mr. Pendanski!" X-Ray shouted from his hole. "Wait, Mr. Pendanski, I think I may have found something." The boys all followed Mr. Pendanski as he walked over to X-Ray's hole. Stanley could see the gold tube sticking out of some dirt on the end of X-Ray's shovel. Mr. Pendanski examined it and took a long look at his flat bottom. "I think the warden's going to like this." "Does X-Ray get the day off?" asked Squid. "Just keep digging until someone says otherwise," Mr. Pendanski said. Then he smiled. "But if I were you, Rex, I wouldn't dig too hard." Stanley watched the cloud of dust move across the lake to the cabin beneath the trees. The boys in Group E were just going to have to wait. It didn't take long for the pickup to return. Mr. Pendanski stepped out of the cab. A tall woman with red hair stepped out of the passenger side. She looked even taller than she was, since Stanley was down in his hole. She wore a black cowboy hat and black cowboy boots, which were studded with turquoise stones. The sleeves of her shirt were rolled up and her arms were covered with freckles, as was her face. She walked right up to X-Ray. "This where you found it?" "Yes, ma'am." "Your good work will be rewarded." She turned to Mr. Pendanski. "Drive X-Ray back to camp, let him take a double shower, and give him some clean clothes. But first, I want you to fill everyone's canteen." "I just filled them a little while ago," said Mr. Pendanski. The warden stared hard at him. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was soft. "I had just filled them when Rex—" "Excuse me," the warden said again. "Did I ask you when you last filled them?" "No, but it's just—" "Excuse me." Mr. Pendanski stopped talking. The warden wiggled her finger for him to come to her. "It's hot, and it's only going to get hotter," she said. "Now, these fine boys have been working hard. Don't you think it might be possible that they might have taken a drink since you last filled their canteens?" Mr. Pendanski said nothing. The warden turned to Stanley. "Caveman, will you come here, please?" Stanley was surprised she knew his name. He had never seen her. Until she stepped out of the truck, he didn't even know the warden was a woman. He nervously went toward her. "Mr. Pendanski and I have been having a discussion. Have you taken a drink since Mr. Pendanski last filled your canteen?" Stanley didn't want to cause any trouble for Mr. Pendanski. "I still got plenty left," he said. "Excuse me." He stopped. "Excuse me?" He stopped. "Yeah, I drank some." "Thank you. May I see your canteen, please?" Stanley handed it to her. Her fingernails were painted dark red. She gently shook the canteen, letting the water swish inside the plastic container. "Do you hear empty spaces?" she asked. "Yes," said Mr. Pendanski. "Then fill it," she said. "And the next time I tell you to do something, I expect you to do it without questioning my authority. If it's too much trouble for you to fill a canteen, I'll give you a shovel. You can dig the hole, and the caveman can fill your canteen." She turned back to Stanley. "I don't think that would be too much trouble for you, would it?" "No," said Stanley. "So what will it be?" she asked Mr. Pendanski. "Do you want to fill the canteens, or do you want to dig?" "I'll fill the canteens," said Mr. Pendanski. "Thank you." Mr. Pendanski filled the canteens. The warden got a pitchfork out of the back of the pickup. She poked it through X-Ray's dirt pile to see if anything else might have been buried in there as well. "After you drop off X-Ray, I want you to bring back 3 wheelbarrows," she said. X-Ray got in the pickup. As the truck pulled away, he leaned out of the wide window, and waved. "Zero," said the warden, "I want you to take over X-Ray's hole." She seemed to know that Zero was the fastest digger. "Armpit and Squid, you will keep digging where you have been," she said, "but you're each going to have a helper. Zigzag, you help Armpit, Magnet will help Squid, and Caveman, you'll work with Zero. We're going to dig the dirt twice. Zero will dig it out of the hole, and Caveman will carefully shovel it into a wheelbarrow. Zigzag will do the same for Armpit, and the same with Magnet and Squid. We don't want to miss anything. If either of you find something, you'll both get the rest of the day off and a double shower. When the wheelbarrows are full, you are to dump them away from this area. We don't want any dirt piles to get in the way." The warden remained at the site for the remainder of the day, along with Mr. Pendanski and Mr. Sir, who showed up after a while. Occasionally, Mr. Sir would leave to take water to the other groups of campers. But otherwise, he and the water truck stayed parked there. The warden saw to it that nobody in Group D was ever thirsty. Stanley did as he was told. He carefully looked through all the dirt dug up by Zero as he shoveled it into the wheelbarrow, though he knew he wouldn't find anything. It was easier than digging his own hole. When the wheelbarrow was full, he took it a good distance away before dumping it. The warden couldn't keep still. She kept walking around, looking over the boy's shoulders and sticking her pitchfork through the dirt piles. "You're doing fine, just fine," she told Stanley. After a while, she told the boys to switch places so that Stanley, Zigzag, and Magnet dug in the holes, and Zero, Armpit, and Squid shoveled the excavated dirt into the wheelbarrows. And that, dear listeners/readers/viewers, is where we will stop for the night. as that is 10 pages of holes read to you dramatically by yours truly, Mr. Brett Harrison Picorni. Now, like I said, feel free to go. Well, I didn't say this before, but feel free to go back and listen to the previous episodes if you're not all caught up. That way you can catch up. And, obviously you can hear all the other things I've been reading. I read Harry Potter previously, as well as some short stories. I've been reading some Russian fairy tales, and I've been reading Dracula as well. Leave a comment if you'd like a shout out. You've still got about a minute before I say good night. But yes, if you'd like a shout out, please leave a comment. Or if you just want to leave a comment, do so. But I urge you to like and subscribe if you haven't already. You are welcome, Heather. You have a great night as well. You are welcome to like and subscribe. In fact, I encourage you to do so because that will help me out in getting more viewers. And I would love it if I had more viewers who could participate and comment and all that good stuff. Because I do love telling stories and I do love entertaining others. And I would really love to help as many people as possible. So like and subscribe on YouTube, join the Facebook group Storytime, and keep up with it so that you know when these things will happen, when it's going to happen, and all that jazz. If you are already liked and subscribed on YouTube and you are a part of the Facebook group, please share either or both on your page. That way others can see it as well and can join in the fun. I would love to see as many people as possible be a part of this. So with that, I will say good night, I love you, good night, I bid you adieu. Until tomorrow, my friends, when we will continue the reading of Bram Stoker's Dracula.